Hello, my name is Ishai Rosenberg, and I am presenting the paper Query Efficient Black Box Attack against Sequence-Based Malware Classifiers. I've worked on this research with Professor Asaf Shabtai, Professor Yuval Elovich, and Professor Lior Rokach, all of us from the Ben-Gurion University of the Negev in Israel. The outline of the paper is as follows. We are trying to subvert dynamic analysis classifier using API call sequences as feature. Our attack modifies the malicious code, specifically the API calls, to be classified as benign, and this is without modifying the malicious functionality. We have two variants for our attack, and we'll discuss them both later on. This attack is generic and works against many classifiers type. Again, we will see that later on. And we're trying to minimize the number of target classifier queries, cloud-based scenario. The challenges of our proposed attack are as follows. First of all, our main goal and main challenge is to minimize the number of black box classifier queries. The reason for this is that in a cloud-based scenario, such as machine learning as a service, every query costs the attacker money. More than this, using increased number of queries, actually increasing the chance that the attack can be detected using defense methods such as stateful defenses that keep tracks of the queries in the system, such as the work of Genetel. More than this, you have the unique challenges in the cybersecurity domain. For instance, the original malicious functionality of the malware must remain intact. And this is as opposed to computer vision, in which changing a pixel color doesn't break the image. However, if, for instance, you add, let's say, exit process API call in the middle of the malicious functionality, obviously it would cause the damage to the functionality, because every API call after this one would not take place. More than this, there are other challenges, such as the term small perturbation used frequently in computer vision attacks. What does it mean when you talk about API calls? What does it mean, a small perturbation of the write file API call? Does it mean modifying it to read file, different operation of the same media? Does it mean modifying it to reg set value X? This is modifying to a similar operation, a write operation on different media. It's interesting questions that we have investigated during our research. The overview of the malware classification process is as follows. First of all, we are running a dynamic analysis of the file, and therefore we are running it inside the VMware. We used VirtualBox, and we're using Cuckoo Sandbox to monitor the API calls of the process being run. This generated a JSON report, and the JSON report is being parsed by a parser that we have developed. And from this parser, we get one hot encoded API call sequence, which is being used as the vector for the classifier. The classifier report whether this sequence is malicious or benign. And here you can see one architecture, for example, the architecture of the LSTM classifier. Let's discuss a bit how this classifier works. The classifier gets an API called a sequence. Now, each API call doesn't being classified by its own, because an API call is not malicious per se, otherwise it wasn't being invented. But the context of the nearby API calls is what's being used in order to decide whether an API call is malicious or not. For instance, in this sequence, the API call virtual alloc isn't malicious and being commonly used in many benign programs. However, the sequence virtual alloc followed by, after maybe some intermediate API calls in between, write process memory is more suspicious, and the subsequence of virtual alloc, write process memory, and create remote thread is actually an API call indicative of a common code injection technique, which is commonly used by malicious software and rarely used by benign software. So this is already malicious. So the LSTM classifier or any other API call-based sequence classifier would use the contextual information of nearby API calls in order to classify the API call trace as a whole. The threat model we are using is as follows. The malware classifier is using only API call sequences as its feature. The adversary has access to the malware classifier as a black box. We have, again, two variants. One is the decision-based variant, meaning the attacker have access only to the classification, only to the label predicted by the classifier, or score-based, meaning the attacker has access to the confidence score of the classifier. Both such classifiers exist in VirusTotal and next-generation antiviruses. The malware classifier feature are known to the attacker, in this case, the monitored API calls by Cuckoo Sandbox, or at least a subset of such, and the attacker doesn't have any knowledge about the classifier type, architecture, or any other hyperparameter using to train it. Our attack or our attack flow actually differs by three different parameters. First of all, the attacker can vary the iteration method. The iteration method of how to add perturbation, or in our case, how to add API calls, can either be linear iteration method, meaning the attacker keep adding API calls and then submitting the new sequence into the classifier in order to see if it is malicious or not. Or logarithmic backtracking iteration method, meaning the classifier do some sort of the attacker do some sort of binary search, starting with a large number of perturbation and then removing half of them every time in order to maintain or remain with low number of added API calls in order to prevent anomaly detection of this abnormal added API calls. Secondly, the attack varies by the attacker knowledge. The attacker can either have, as mentioned before, score-based knowledge, knowing the confidence score of the malware classifier, and in this case, it can use better optimization algorithm, such as adaptive evolutionary algorithm, or he can only know the decision base, meaning only the label of the malware classifier, and in this case, he doesn't have access to those optimization algorithms, which require more knowledge. And for the perturbation type, the perturbation can be random perturbation, meaning every time you add the API call, it can be simply randomly pick out of all of the API calls available to be monitored, or benign perturbation, meaning this is actually a benign sequence being generated by a SecGAN generative adversarial network trained on benign API call sequences. And therefore, you increase the chance of the added API call to be in a benign context. Let's speak a bit about the self-adaptive uniform mixing evolutionary algorithm that we've used. We've tried several smart search or random search algorithms, and this one gave us the best result. It's a similar variant to the one used by Dang et al., but it does fit, and we did fit it into our domain. For instance, every mutation is not modifying an API call, but it's only adding API call, which kind of changed the flow of the algorithm. But like in every other evolutionary algorithm, in every generation, a new population of candidate is being produced, and the old generation dies. And besides the adversarial sequence, each candidate carries the mutation rate, which can either be low or high. Each new candidate in each generation is produced in the same way. The best of two uniformly selected individual is being selected. So unlike most evolutionary algorithms, there is no crossover, meaning you don't take part of one candidate and another part of another candidate. The reason is that this doesn't make sense in the cybersecurity domain to take API calls, half a sequence of API calls from one malicious software and half a sequence of API calls from another malicious software, because this would harm the malicious functionality. So again, the uniform mixing does makes better sense. The second part is that the selected parent modifies its mutation rate between two mutation rates, low and high, with a certain probability of P. And the parent replicates in order to generate the new candidate with the mutation, with the new mutation rate. So if the mutation rate after the mutation is low, then low number of mutation would be added to the adversarial sequence. If it's high, then a high number of mutation would be added to the mutation, to the API call sequence. Here we see the results of our attack, and we see that our decision-based attack outperforms the other decision-based attack in previous papers, Rosenberg et al. And Dang et al. And here we see the same thing about our score-based attack, that it can produce better results than previous state-of-the-art work, like Rosenberg et al., Su et al., etc. To conclude, the main contribution of our algorithm are: it's a novel, query efficient end-to-end black box attack, preserving the malware functionality after perturbation. This is a classifier agnostic attack that works against a lot of different architecture, conventional RNN, LSTM, GRU, SVM, logistic regression, many different other classifiers. It's the first generalized decision-based attack, not using the score-based knowledge for RNN variants, feed-forward networks, and traditional machine learning classifiers. And this is an online attack that doesn't require any pre-deployment phase, like as training a surrogate model, which obviously make the attack more complicated. I'll be happy to answer a question. Thank you very much.